Whether it's pain in your lower back or that ache in your shin, if you go about treating them both the same, you're probably going to end up on the shelf longer than you actually need to. Before we get into what we're going to cover today, make sure you hit that subscribe button and press that notification bell. If you're listening on the go, be sure to follow Spoken Soul on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your platform of choice for audio podcasts. As always, thank you. Now let's get into it. Welcome back to Spoken Soul, home of the essential athlete. I'm Terrance, here with Anthony, and today we're breaking down some overuse injuries and some remedies to keep you riding and running. So, Ant, injury's part of the game.
It's part of the game. And the game is that you try to avoid injury as long as possible. But they're inevitable.
Yeah, and they are inevitable, but being able to recognize the early warning signs gives you an opportunity to try to curb whatever it is that is coming on. And I think that as time has gone on, my approach to dealing with injuries has actually changed a little bit. And we'll get into that. But when I want to talk about running first, because running was, for lack of a better term, the first love.
Always the first love.
When it comes to running, typically most overuse injuries are directly related to impact.
Correct.
And from a running perspective, every step that happens during that process, you're putting 2 to 3 times your weight from an impact perspective.
Yeah.
So it's very important that when you're out there running, you take whatever precautions necessary to try to avoid putting yourself in a situation where you actually do end up injured. Mm-hmm. And typically, the types of injuries that you get from running are, the shin splints, IT band injuries and things like that. But
calf strains.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah. And for the most part, prevention when it comes to those things is really about your form and cadence.
Yes.
And I did a solo sprint about cadence a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not really going to get into the actual, specifics from that perspective. But there's a technical aspect to running that can help you stay, for lack of a better term, upright during the process.
That's a cadence.
Yeah.
Cadence. I think increasing those steps per minute. Taking those shorter steps. That allows for less impact. And it stops the braking effect. From running. I always say, and overstriding as well. I actually happen to probably be an overstrider sometimes, like if, especially when I'm trying to run faster sometimes, and I always say, which is a little related to that to me, running is the hardest sport because not only do you have to carry your weight, but you have to brace the impact of what that weight may be while you're going fast and trying to move forward.
That's one of the reasons why when it comes to running, your goal should be to be as efficient as possible. Yep. That's where that cadence comes in, and ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that as you stride, your feet are landing directly below you and not out in front of you, and that will help to start. That will help to stop that jarring or that actual braking, and as your stride becomes more efficient, some of those injuries that you would sustain, the percentage of you actually getting those actually decreases based off, that, increased efficiency and 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 the better form. I remember when it's funny because I used to run when I first started running. I used to run in Asics all the time, and I started to notice that the Asics that I was wearing, the wear, and it was a neutral shoe, but the wear was it just wasn't right, and I had. And this used to happen a lot. I used to get a lot of pain in my shins. My IT band was always sore, and at first I wasn't in tune to the science
Yeah.
behind running. But this is where I say the community of running comes in, and it's such a good place to be a part of. At the time, Roadrunner, which is shout out to Roadrunner. Roadrunner had all these different, for lack of a better term, club sessions or trainings that they actually used to do. And they did this, they called them clinics, and they did this good running form clinic. And that's the first place where I really learned about cadence and that 180, strides per minute, or however you want to call it. And they actually put on, like I said, they put on a clinic where they had a metronome, and it was, it would tick, 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 tick. And, they watched your form. And after, I can honestly say that after going to that running clinic, I don't want to say never, but it was pretty much night and day from the perspective of what I was feeling in my lower extremities before and after. Now, I'll say this, one of the other things that, came to light for me as I started to go to those clinics and those different workshops was, maintenance. And when I say maintenance, foam rolling, stretching, active. Here's the thing, and I got excited for a second. The biggest difference between the before and after wasn't just the efficiency from a cadence perspective, activation. Activation before,
You do a great job at that too. I have to say,
that comes
no,
from,
no, I have to say you actually do a great job at that because I know, when we were running, you would always you call it the warm up run.
yeah,
And I don't know if you noticed, but I don't do the
I
warm-up.
noticed.
I don't do the warm up run, but you'll see me doing like an active, an activation where it's, I'll say a heavy walk to kind of activate,
I love how you say that,
because I don't want to use all my energy up. But I definitely understand that piece of it, and honestly, it has been very instrumental in warming the legs up so that the legs, aren't as tired, and once you get into the run and you can get into it more smoothly. So I definitely think that I benefited from that from you and what Roadrunner came to you.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, those the pre-activation drills and that warm-up run is a game changer, right? Because before that, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, before that, I would just do the regular static stretches, which all they really do is tire out the actual muscles. They're not getting the muscles prepped for that actual workout. But those clinics taught me, and not only did those clinics taught me about the pre-activation drills, but at the same time, it wasn't just a teaching. I noticed the actual difference. My body felt the actual difference. I wasn't experiencing those same issues that I was actually, experienced before. And some of them are pretty straightforward. I mean, the thing with it is, it's so easy not to do them,
yes,
but it's so easy to do them,
yes,
right? Some quick single leg calf raises off the sidewalk. I don't even know what the technical term of it is, but when I do that walk and I swoop,
Yeah, I call it the bird song. That's what I call it.
you do those
Yeah.
swoops and just high knees, just basic single. I mean, just some basic activation drills to get the body warmed up, to get your legs ready, and to get that blood flowing, so you can actually put yourself in a position where you're doing as much as possible to get your body in a state where it's ready for what's to actually come.
Like warming up the engine. And I would say I am guilty because and I think as runners too, we're always I don't know, not that we're always pressed for time, but we always want to maximize time. So, when I go out to start a run, I have time to do it, but I'm like, oh, doing it, I could have run a quarter mile by the time I did that. So we think of things in the time perspective when that should be part of the routine. So you're absolutely right about that.
It's funny about the time piece because we're all victims of it. I think that here's what I say about training yourself. Once you make something part of your routine, it's part of your routine.
Yes.
Because you're right. Listen, it's so easy. I think running is one of the most easiest sports to actually get into,
Yep.
right? Because you get yourself a suitable pair of sneakers. You don't even have to have the watch or whatever, but some quick clothing, and you can take off. And so it's so easy to say, okay, let's just run. But once you build it into your routine, those pre-activation drills and those post stretches, it keeps you on the road longer.
Yes.
And again, we can sit here and talk about prevention until we're blue in the face. But at some point, what's going to happen is you are going to run into a scenario where you are going to start to feel a little nag or get a little injured. And in the past, we used to always say this: rest up, rest up, rest up. And you would just sit. My mindset has changed a little bit because you can begin to address those nagging injuries. And I think there's a difference between the nagging injuries and
sudden injury. I agree.
Yeah. For those nagging injuries, there are things that you can do to actually coast your way into a situation where you get on the mend.
Active healing.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just shortening that distance. Sometimes it's slowing the pace. There are little things that you can actually do to actually put you in a situation where, again.
And I think the biggest part too and I think that goes across the board for athletes is, sometimes you got to check your ego at the door. I think a lot of times, I know I've been in those situations where, I feel that twitch, or I feel that little nagging injury going on, and I'm like, I'm gonna work through,
Yeah.
And not pull back, but continue to try to do what you were regularly gonna do. And again, I think that can bring on injuries. So I wanted to mention that part, as far as, being able to recognize whatever those different things may be, instead of just,
you go.
moving past them or trying to work through them, trying to be Rocky.
Yeah, we mentioned it in I think one of the very first episodes we talked about that ego. And I'll be honest, look, if I look back to, before I went out with the back, I remember one of my runs. It was during the week where, it was I got a little twitch in the back, but you know what? I'm gonna push through it, and I pushed through it. I mean, I ended up paying for it, but again, I think that's one of those things where that your ego kicks in, and what I should have done was slow down, do something nice and easy. Our biggest challenge is always going to be ourselves, particularly when you have something on the schedule and you say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And I always say this, I said earlier that when you make something routine, it's routine. Sometimes you can't be so rigid because you can do a routine, and as you are known, remix it.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And pivot.
You can,
Yeah, and
yes.
pivot too. I think that's something that you know, as an aging athlete, I've learned that, you know, that your body is going to tell you things. Now, whether you decide to listen to it or not,
Yes.
is something totally different.
Yeah.
And if you choose not to listen to it, there is a cost associated with that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, you said it. To listen or not to listen?
That is the question.
Right? That is the question. And a lot of times, if you listen, you put yourself in a situation where, okay, well, you're not going to be on the shelf for as long as you would have been, and if you didn't.
I agree.
You know what I mean? So, from the running perspective, again, the goal would be to try to, you know, minimize overuse injuries whenever you can. But when they do happen, it really is checking your ego, putting yourself in a situation where either you're doing less mileage, you're doing less mileage, you're changing up your routine so you're not putting as much stress on whatever ailment it is that you're having, or you find a way to supplement or pivot from what it is that you were actually doing,
Yes.
but do something else that is not going to aggravate whatever it is you're doing. And interestingly enough, this is where I pivot and go to cycling, because from a cycling perspective, posture is really the big issue, right? And I mentioned this before. One of the best things you can do for yourself from an injury prevention perspective when we start talking about cycling is getting a bike fit.
I agree.
Having your equipment adjusted so when you're on there, you're not overextending your legs, you're not jamming your back up.
Yeah.
So it's very important, and this is going to be a theme. It's very important to make sure that you get a professional bike fit if you're going to be logging a lot of miles on the actual bike.
I agree, and I'll tell you a funny story that I know you remember. I think I had just purchased the Damani, but I hadn't really been riding it, and then we had a ride. But I was riding my first Amanda, and again, I didn't get a professional fit, but I had gotten fitted for that bike. But I remember one time I went back to riding the Amanda, and it was me, you, and Court, and I think Court was roasting me about the little kid's seat or something like that.
I remember that.
And I didn't notice it, and it's funny that he was actually able to notice the difference, you know, between the two bikes, and how, you know, again, I hadn't had that quote unquote fit for that bike, and you could tell. And it's funny looking back, you know, I was able to ride that bike, and that bike was a faster bike, but I was always more tired. It always took me a little longer to recover, and I spent more time more sore than I should have been, and basically because of that.
Yeah, it's particularly when you're first coming to a sport, and you don't know what your expectations should be from, does this feel right? You know what I mean? I remember when NBX was still NBX in Warwick, and I went in there, and I was talking to, I believe his name was Ken at the time. I think I talked about Ken before. I was talking to Ken, and at the time I was fairly new to cycling, although I had just purchased a second bike, so I was fairly new, but I had two bikes. But anyway, at the time, that second bike I hadn't gotten fitted for it, and he was very clear about, okay, well, from an expectation perspective, here's what you should expect, here's what you should actually feel, and the knowledge from someone who has been doing it for so long immediately, again, and I think sometimes we have to humble ourselves, immediately made me comprehend, I don't know what the hell. I don't know how I should feel on this. And it led to me actually getting that bike fit. And again, the difference, that's the thing. You don't know what the difference you don't know there's gonna be a difference unless you actually go and actually have the actual bike fit.
And then I think, and also as an aside from the bike fit too, once you get that fit, to understand that sometimes you may need adjustments too, because sometimes again we ride and sometimes we don't know, if the seat post goes down or shifts or whatever else. Those little, you know, tweaks can really cause a difference in your ride as well. Because that's actually what happened with my first bike. Because when I first got that bike, I got that bike because I was doing my first triathlon, and I actually did get fitted on that. And I do believe somewhere down the road, like the seat post had shifted and went down, and I really didn't notice it because obviously you automatically assume that does that. But after the roasting, I had realized that it was, and after looking at the other bike. But I think that's important too, that as your body may change, you may need additional bike fits, um, throughout your cycling journey.
Yeah, and that's a part of maintenance,
Yep.
right? I mean,
Yep.
it's good to get the actual initial bike fit, and you might get to the point where you have enough experience where you can make minor adjustments here and there. But as time goes on, it is a good idea to get in there and make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, because again, overall it's going to make you a much more efficient rider. And when we start talking about efficiency on the bike, again, from the bike, your enemy is not impact, right? It's really it's posture, and for lack of a better term, what's the term I want to use? I want to say repetition. I guess I can.
Yeah, repetition.
I can say repetition. So if you don't address those, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have an overuse injury. We talked about cadence from a running perspective. From a cycling perspective, there's a cadences as well when you start talking about efficiency. The difference is, that cadence is really revolutions per minute, right? Yeah. As your crank turns, or you turn your crank,
yeah.
right? You want to make sure that you master your RPMs, because when you put yourself in a position where you're mashing steadily on the pedals, as opposed to making sure that you're somewhere between that 85 and 95 RPMs, you're putting a lot of stress on your body. And typically that's going to show up in lower back pain because of that position that you're in, particularly over, long distances.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, you're right about that, like with that, and sometimes the cyclists don't really utilize their gears properly, so they're not able to get in.
Yeah, you see me up there.
No, you do well with that. We got a couple of riders who they don't really know their gears, so they're not really in doing the proper RPMs, when they should be. And again, like you said, if they're grinding over a long period of time, that puts a lot of wear and tear on your knees specifically. And I know for me as a rider, I like to think, most of the force and power coming from your legs. So
yeah,
and it's different compared to running versus riding, where you're using a different muscle. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and then off the bike too, it is different. There's some things that you want to, I talked about pre-activation and post stresses. When you're off the bike, one of the things that you really want to focus on is your hip flexors. And I don't think that we do enough of that anyway. Anyway, regardless of whether or not running or riding. And one of the eye-opening things for me is, excuse me, as I've gotten wiser, I'm not using the term older, as I've gotten wiser, one of the things that I started doing was, I started understanding I need to do extra things to take care of my body. So every 4 to 5 weeks, I go get a massage. And my massage therapist was like, listen, you know, your hip flexors are really tight. You want to start Here's one of the things that when you invest in yourself and you find yourself speaking to the right people, one of the things that I like about this massage therapist is they'll say, okay, well, what are you doing? There's questions before anything begins. And I explain how I run and I ride, and then, you know, they start developing what they're going to be working on. And that situation was like, listen, your hip flexors are extremely tight. You want to start doing these particular exercises. We're going to work on them today. Yeah. But if these are things that you're doing, you want to work on these because it's going to make you a much better rider.
Yes.
And you mentioned that mashing has an impact on, you know, your knees, and because it's not just your back, but being able to put yourself in a position where you're efficient with your, you know, your cadence on the actual bike, making sure you're taking care of, you know, your hip flexors and things like that off the bike, you know, that goes a long way for prevention. But again, just as we said with running, all the prevention in the world is not going to stop all injuries.
Correct.
Right? And so you're going to run into a situation where, you know, you're going to get an injury, and then it's a matter of, okay, well, how do you actually deal with that injury?
Very true.
So from a maintenance perspective, you know, I talked about loosening up your hip flexors, but whether it's running or cycling, foam rolling is key, particularly IT band, you know, lower parts of your the calf. I actually use an ice roller, right? So for this part of the shins,
you're bringing it way back. I'm gonna bring it back in the day. Remember the stick?
Yeah.
I still got one. Listen, that joint saved me. I don't know who makes that thing, but that thing right there, when I had my IT band injury, oh my God, that was a godsend.
There are a number of tools out there that actually, that'll keep you right, right, for lack of a better term, it'll keep you right. So far, our conversations has really split, you know, running and cycling into two separate situations, because again, for the most part, when you're talking about overuse injuries, you really can't treat the two the same. But there is an element of crossover, right? When we start talking about these. And when I say crossover, I'm talking about a strategy for rehab. What knowledge have you gained from your experience that you put into, or you would put into, a rehab strategy as a crossover for those two sports?
All right. And then I'm gonna give you the third spot. But
oh, that's right. Yeah.
I'm gonna give you the third spot. But I think overall is, you know, knowing that, let's say for example, when I would be injured from running, 9 out of 10 times it wouldn't hurt me to ride.
That's a great point.
Which was crazy, because in my mind I'm like, it's still a legs, but like you said earlier, that reinforces the fact that it's the impact. You know, so, you know, when not being able to run, the cross training with the riding helps to keep your endurance up, so that when you come back to running, that you're not, you know, that you're not winded, and, you know, you're able to jump back in on that. And I also believe too, especially when I had the IT band injury, they would say that was like really tight. So for me, it helped to loosen it up. So, and it helped me so that I could at least, you know, be functional again. I'm not sure how many times you've had an IT injury, but that felt more painful than me breaking something. Like, it just was just so painful and nagging.
IT bands put a lot of people on the sidelines, man.
Yeah.
You hit on two very important points. The first was the no impact, right? So again, I think it's a great strategy where if you're experiencing an issue on the running side, you can use the bike as a rehab, right? And vice versa. The benefit of the bike is there's really no impact. the other thing that you mentioned was sometimes you want to shift that load from your physical legs to your heart and lungs, that cardiovascular system. Because what that does is, again, from an impact perspective, it's relieving that, but it's keeping that endurance level up.
Yeah.
And it's giving you the opportunity to say, I need to pivot. Let me pivot and keep this area. So you don't end up in a situation where all that training gold that you've amassed is depleted.
Lost.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think, from the riding perspective too, I think sometimes when you're tight and you have that the other injuries with your legs and the posture, sometimes running can loosen that up too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So the cross training aspect with that, and I think also, we'll throw the third component in. When I can't do either one of those,
You get in that water.
I get in the water, and I will say, it helps with both of those because, and I learned that by accident. I had hurt my IT band when I was training for one of the tries, and then I was swimming, and then I saw this old guy in the pool, and he still goes to the gym too, but he's like walking up and down the pool, and I'm like, you see this shit with on the move sometimes with the athletes are training in the pool, and I'm like, let me see if I could run in this pool, and it was less impact.
Yeah.
So now, if I happen to, if my IT something like that's acting crazy, if I'm swimming, I'll do like light jogs to try to, at least get that piece of it and to try to help strengthen up those muscles. So, there's a number of different things you can do.
You know what's crazy is every doctor I talk to says swimming, and it's true, swimming is one of the best things that you can act, one of the best exercises you can do, particularly when, because I'm having the back situation right now. Doctor said, oh yeah, you can ride, but swimming would be great for you. And what most people don't know is I have a huge in-ground pool in the backyard, and I am never in it. Never in it. So it's a huge opportunity out there that I have not taken advantage of, and I probably won't. Well, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, there's the weightlessness that you experience in there allows for you to do a certain number of things.
And I think one point I want to bring up as well is, even outside of the rehabbing piece from preventative maintenance, I think that having a good balance with the things that you're doing, so that you're not overuse injuries are from repetitive things that you do continuously. So, even as a person, like for my workouts during the week, I don't, do the same workouts. I happen to, I'll bike one day, I'll run one day, I'll swim one day. I'm supposed to do stretching and strength training, but I don't do that. But giving a good mix of those things too can help keep you off the shelf. And I'm not saying that everyone has to necessarily run, bike, and swim, but if you have a good variety of the exercises that you're doing, I think that, to me anyway, you're doing different things with your body versus just that same thing over and over and over again.
The one thing that we need to look at, and I don't think people do this enough when we start talking about, preventing injuries, whether it be for overuse or anything, is equipment.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for those of you who know me, you know that at one point, I ain't no more, I had a bit of a shoe problem. But I would name each one of my shoes. And Ant, you have to have a certain number of shoes because, number one, I don't run in the same pair of shoes back to back.
Two, they got to match.
That's right.
I just got to throw that in.
Two, they got to match. Yeah, two, they got to match. Three, I mean, listen, they got to be lit, man. They got to be fly.
Yes.
Let me throw that term.
And four, they have to be functional for what that particular run is too.
Exactly. And that's a good point. And so from a gear perspective, I talked about how I used to run in those Asics, and I noticed the wear on them relatively quickly. But again, that had to do with, my cadence. But at the same time, from a gear perspective, there are two things you want to be mindful of when it comes to at least your running shoes. Number one, you want to be mindful of the wear pattern on the actual shoes because that's going to give you an indication of whether or not your form is off, whether or not you're doing something, or whether or not you need to be doing something different. So that's number one. But number two, you want to track the mileage on those, because after a while, that rubber,
Yes.
it compresses to a point where the life of that shoe is done, and it's not going to decompress anymore. So I do 300 miles.
See, you're better than me.
I know some people do 400, 350.
You're better than me. And I want to bring up another point too when you talked about the run pattern, because we know an individual who, some people drag their feet when they run.
That is true.
So if you drag your feet, that's going to cause a different wear pattern for your shoes and the life of the shoes as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, as well as the different shoes and what they do. So for example, for me, I have shoes that are everyday shoes. I got fast shoes and I got long run shoes. Because they technically really do different things, and they're meant for different things. So, for example, the most miles I'll put is on the short mile ones, because I'm not really using them that much, and I won't put as many miles on the long run shoe, because that's a stability shoe that's meant for the longer runs. So you want to make sure that you have the stability for that. So I agree with that. I think that's something that most people don't do, and I think for me, and just like what you said too, I really started paying more attention to that when I got my first IT injury, because again we were engrossed in with Roadrunner, and they were like our running gurus. So that's when we were able to learn those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, especially from the equipment perspective with shoes. Shoes is definitely, I think a lot of runners don't really pay attention to that.
Yeah. So on the cycling side, I'm laughing because this is important, but you might not. I'm sure you're gonna remember it. A couple weeks ago,
Quartz clips.
The cleats on his shoe. Listen. I don't believe I've seen a pair of cleats on shoes as bad as those. And he had the nerve to say, is it time to change these? Listen, when you clip in, you are one with the bike.
You're right.
You need to make sure that those clips, those cleats, you can monitor them and make sure that when it comes time to actually change them, you can change them. Because again, from an efficiency perspective, once you're locked in, you become more efficient, because now as you rotate your pedals around, again, it's...
And entry perspective too.
Yeah.
Because if they're not operational and they come out, like, you could get injured.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with you in that. The cleats is definitely one thing that I probably should pay a little more. I'm not as bad as Court.
Yeah, well, you got to keep this in mind.
But I should, as much as I ride, I should pay more attention to that.
As the edges round off, you're not as secure.
Yep.
Right, and so again, that does two things. From an injury, from the perspective of your foot may come off, that's real. And again, from an efficiency perspective, you're not as secure, so you're not getting that efficiency. The other part about that too is this, and I've made a point to do this because I don't know if you remember this. We went for a ride with Marianne and Skip, and it wasn't so much that my cleats were worn out, is that the screws weren't tight. Over time, what happens is those screws loosen up. And I lost a screw. I don't know if you remember. We had rode out here. I don't think we went all the way up the Uxbridge, but we had stopped here. So
okay.
And then on the way going back, one of the screws came out of my clip. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to find it, and the multi-tool and the saddlebag to put it back on. But again, you want to make sure that you're checking that, and I guess that's part of maintenance. You want to make sure you check that to make sure that.
And another thing I think we haven't spoken about is the cleats part. I'm guilty of it for walking around in my cleats.
Yeah.
And you put us on
to those
those
covers.
And the funny part about it is I got them in my bag, but I rarely use them.
You want to know what's funny? I don't know what my cleat covers are, because what I used to do was I used to clip them underneath the
Yeah, you
part
had like
of
a little clip thing. Yeah,
I
remember
would
that.
clip
Yeah.
them underneath
Yeah.
the actual bottom of the seat, and I have no idea where they are. And you know, right now, I mean, I keep all my cycling stuff in one. I'm gonna guess that they're gone, because I keep all my cycling stuff in one spot now, and I have no idea where they actually are.
And I think that's something. I mean, we haven't been in a lot of situations lately where we've been where we walk around in them, but we have been in situations where we should have been using those. And I'll say for myself, particularly when I do the bike marshals, I'm notorious after that to put my bike on and I don't have my shoes are in the car, and I'm just walking around. So
Yeah.
I got to do better with that. I'm gonna do better with that.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, you know, from an overuse perspective, when we're talking about running and cycling, running is typically going to have that, you know, the ache in your shin, IT band issue. Cycling, you might get some pain right in the you know, the tendon right below the kneecap, or, you know, lower back. But the issue is, well, I don't want to really say the issue, but what you want to focus on is, you know, there are things that you can do to work towards prevention, but prevention doesn't always happen. And so when that doesn't happen, from a rehab strategy, you don't always have to just say, I want to sit, or I'm going to sit and rest.
And I agree with you. I have to say, I love that approach, because if you sit, you know, it's almost going to make it worse, you know, because you're just sitting there, and then you're going to try to rest and then go back, you know, and again, for most of us, from an ego standpoint, when we come back, like we're going to, and I'm sorry, DC, but you're going to do a Dave Curry and
Leave my man DC
and
alone.
just jump back in, you know, because you're excited to be back, you know, so it's not like you're going to ease back in, where it's easier to dial back. And then once you get back, you know, you feel a little stronger, that you can gradually go back to where you need to be. And I think, now that I think about it, the most injuries I ever incurred was that year that we did like 14 or 15 halves. And it was from overuse, and I'll never forget, you know, during that time frame, you know, I mean, at one point I had to actually dial back on a couple of runs where it was just like I just couldn't physically do the training, because we were just doing 13.1, 13.1, 13.1, you know. But looking back and in retrospect, that's a good example of how sometimes when you just dial back, you know, and understand too. And I think the most important point I want to make is that, you know, as athletes, we think that like we have to get out of our head from an ego perspective. If you lose a week or 8 or 10 days, you're not going to lose your fitness, you know, and that it's okay sometimes to take a step back, you know, one step back so you can take 4 steps forward versus being on a bench for like 9 weeks, you know, or whatever amount of time that may be.
Yeah. So I'm going to close with this. From a running perspective, you really need to manage, you know, that shock impact. And then from a cycling perspective, you want to make sure that whatever equipment that you have is dialed in so you can manage that posture. And by making those small adjustments, the opportunity for you to be on the road and not sitting out increases. With that, we want to end with the way we always end. Keep those wheels spinning and those feet moving. We'll see you on the road.
Keep hustling.